Welcome to our series, the third of 5 of the Complete Guide to Remote Work. In our previous video on the pros and cons of remote work, we took the side of the worker to give you a variety of advantages and challenges that remote workers face. This time, we'll be taking the side of companies and going over the steps and processes involved in hiring and managing remote employees. Let's start with the benefits of having remote workers. What makes remote workers particularly desirable is that the majority of their advantages to a company are of significant monetary amounts. We'll go over 4 major advantages here, and as we mentioned the numbers, keep in mind that these are per worker, so they can add up pretty quickly. Ready? The first major advantage is that remote worker turnover is at least half of what it is for in-office employees. To find out why this is a huge deal, ask yourself this. Do I know what it costs to lose one employee? The answer is between $10,000 and $30,000. Why so high? Because productivity falls in the same way as when a factory shuts down one of their machines. The work still needs to get done. So, here's an interesting fact from one company called Actualize Consulting. They've been enjoying a turnover rate of just 4% in the last 4 years, with an average tenure being 5 years, thanks to their loyal remote workforce. Moving on to the second major advantage, real estate savings. We all know that renting office space is expensive. What we don't know, though, is exactly how much we can save if we include all the costs associated with having a physical office. Thankfully, AT&T and Aetna did the work for us. Over a year's period, AT&T reported that their savings amounted to $30 million. As for Aetna, the savings amounted to a whopping $78 million. Forgive me if I'm getting the pronunciation wrong on that. The next and third major advantage is diversity. It's undeniable that hiring remote workers opens you up to a greater pool of talent. But you know what else? It opens you up for more profits. Let's break that down. If you have more work than your employees can handle, by working with remote employees, you can tap into different groups with a greater variety of experience. Second of all, studies have found that diversity in a company, especially in executive teams, is directly correlated with how much money a company brings in. Wouldn't you want that? Speaking of more profits, how about fewer losses? That's our fourth major advantage. The fact that remote workers tend to have fewer absences than their in-office counterparts. The reason is due to work-life balance and mental and physical health. Because employees tend to travel and interact with people who may be sick themselves, a company can lose as little as $1,800 per year per employee, or as much as double that, according to research. Collectively, US companies lose over $300 billion per year because of absences. The last major advantage of hiring those who work remotely is the elimination of relocation costs. Nortel, a telecommunications company, estimates that it saves as much as $100,000 for every worker that it doesn't have to relocate. The math is simple. The higher the value of the worker, the higher the cost of relocation. This is our last major advantage of remote workers for companies. But how do you ensure that you have the right remote worker, one that will be of benefit to you? Easy. You need to hire the one with the right traits for the environment. So, how to hire the ideal remote worker? Well, most of today's jobs require workers to pass personality and skill tests before being hired. The same holds true for remote workers. Thus, remote workers should possess the specific traits that make them suited to the demands of being remote. Because some people work better with direct supervision and accountability, such employees, while totally fine in the office environment, may struggle when working remotely. Therefore, when it's time to evaluate a candidate, you want to make sure that they have all of the right traits. One such trait is the ability to work remotely and to cooperate with a virtual team. After all, not everyone is a self-starter, and not everyone works together well. Similarly, when working with others, it's important that the worker possesses succinct communication skills, especially when needing to explain their current status of what and how they're doing. It's one thing to communicate, but to communicate an idea in short, clearly expressed forms is something not everyone can do well. Another important trait is staying organized. When working remotely, it's easier to get lost when multiple tasks, for example, different emails, need addressing. Lastly, discipline and timeliness are traits that are necessary to have to be an effective worker. As previously mentioned, self-starting is important because it means that the worker is driven to completion. If someone requires management constantly, low productivity may just be the result. That's it then. Those are all the traits you need to look for. If someone doesn't have all of them, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're of no benefit. They may simply need more training. So, let's say you find your ideal worker. What's next? You need a plan on how to take care of your remote workers or employees. This plan begins with setting limits that most expect to be honored when working remotely. Here's why that's important. A plethora of studies have shown that one of the top reasons, if not the top, for why workers want remote work is its flexibility. Because managers hold an employee's fate in their hands, what they do or don't can affect how well the worker performs. So asking too much may cause burnout. This leads us to our first point. Remote workers need to have lots of breaks, according to scientific data. The reason for this is that the brain cannot focus for very long. One study found that if an employee is expected to work for a solid 8-hour day, it's likely that the employee will actually work the equivalent of about 3. Even so, those 3 hours might not be the highest quality. Thus, it's important to emphasize breaking. As for how long, the numbers for that are not a mystery. For every 52 minutes of work, a break of at least 17 minutes should be allowed, using a tool like the Pomodoro timer with desk time. That means with breaks, an 8-hour day should yield almost 5 hours of productivity compared to just 3 for in-office workers. On the topic of hours, remote workers should be encouraged to obtain results rather than put in hours. As we've just mentioned, not everything is as it seems. Hours worked do not equate to the number of tasks completed. Consequently, managers should focus on accomplishable goals. Our last point is that managers also need to encourage workers to disconnect from work completely, because not disconnecting results in the accumulation of work-life balance issues and may increase turnover if workers engage in activities like checking work emails before sleeping. How does one go about encouraging that, you may wonder? It's simple. Make it explicit to them that you don't expect any overtime and that you want them to enjoy their non-work hours. Having said that, we believe that being a manager who cares about employees ought to be the goal, and doing some of the things that we suggest helped you achieve that. If one of your main reasons to hire remote workers is to increase productivity or to save on costs, which is the case for many, then you may already know that a proactive approach is the best approach. Even after having done what managers can do to make remote workers' lives better, there are certain hazards that such workers may face while working remotely. Some of these hazards can be forestalled, whereas the others require the awareness and the knowledge to deal with. There are 3 major hazards that management needs to be attuned to. The first hazard is electronic multitasking, and almost every company out there asks its employees to do this. Unfortunately for them, multitasking for increasing levels of productivity is one of the largest myths ever created. Don't believe it? Texting and driving is illegal in many countries for the same reason, because humans cannot divide their attention effectively. Furthermore, this is backed by Stanford University's research, where researchers found that switching between tasks decreases one's ability to be productive and increases distractibility. The second hazard is remote overload. Just because an employee or worker works remotely doesn't mean that the employee or worker can suddenly handle any more work than he or she could previously. Considering that remote workers are where they are for the flexibility and the work-life balance, remote overload should be dealt with as soon as possible. The third and last hazard is the feeling of isolation. This feeling can be a morale sapper and can have a negative mental and physical health effect on the worker if not caught. Since remote workers do not have the socialization spaces that they normally would in an office, it's important that communication lines like those of video and chat between employees are available for non-work reasons. Isolation is also related to burnout. According to Ryan Mrachek, owner of Kalo, the burnout occurs on problems where you run into a roadblock and don't feel the support or appreciation for your work. This is solved by ensuring at least small contact more often. And that's it! We've covered everything you need to know about the benefits of remote employees, what traits to look for if you're hiring, how to take care of your remote employees, and what remote work hazards to nip in the bud. If you have any other tips you want to share with us about hiring and managing remote employees, feel free to share them in the comments below. Since this is the 3rd video of a series of 5, you can find the previous 2 in the description below. As usual, Don't forget, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already to follow along in our series of remote work. Thanks for watching!